Hi everyone. I hope this is not too loud. I do have a pretty strong voice. Okay, so that was John Leonard Walson, and he was filming, we were just in Malta, and we were filming UFOs on a rooftop of the Intercontinental Hotel in what's called St. Julian area of Malta. And we met up with John Leonard Walson, who is a filmmaker he is very smart technically, and he has combined a number of different size telescopes and mounted a camera lens and a bunch of different magnifications on the lens itself. And I've put out a video, sort of, this is the video on YouTube right now, so you can go watch it later if you haven't already seen it. John Leonard Walson is very well known for photographing craft on near the sun, and amazing gigantic craft, as you may know, as well as very close-up moon footage. And he's doing all of this with his equipment that he put together himself. The kinds of things that NASA won't show you, he is able to show you because he is just, sort of a whiz with putting these things together. He also has a background in the military and some interesting associations with intelligence. However, he is now dedicated himself to trying to get the truth out about UFOs and, the secrecy, basically, that we're all living under, and certainly revealing evidence, because a lot of the people that Camelot talks to do witness testimony. So they tell you what their experience was, but they don't show you evidence. So John Leonard Walson is rather unique in this area. How many people in the audience have seen his videos before? Raise your hand, please. Okay, good, excellent. So he has many videos, and I put some on my website, and we're very lucky to have contact with him at this time. So I know we have a very small audience here. It is one of those twists of fate that goes on, and I have very bright lights on my eyes, so I'm sorry if I'm kind of squinting at the moment. Anyway, so I want to say that, this conference seemed to have a lot of problems associated with putting it on. And of course you can understand that this would go on with regard to the kind of information we're trying to put out there. And it does appear that at least in this part of Europe, there may be added surveillance, added obstacles to getting the truth out, as we say. And I have actually, Bill Ryan, my former partner in Camelot, spoke in, I think it was the Czech Republic many years ago. And that was to a college, sort of a place, a university. And we had a nice audience at that time. Since then, I'm not sure what's gone on here in Europe. I can tell you that we just did a very nice couple of conferences in the UK, very good attendance, and eventually all of this footage will be put onto our Vimeo channel, so you'll be able to see these conferences. And this conference itself, with some help, I believe our hostess, Alexandra, will try to get it, make it available to everyone. So thank you so much for coming. Those of you who braved the obstacles going on to get here, and that goes for the speakers as well. I can say that I guess you've already, I don't know if there was an announcement earlier today about Kevin Annett, but I understand he was detained on the way here. At New York City Airport. I got a communique that Alexandra sent me earlier this morning saying that they believe he was prevented from flying further to come to the conference and speak in person, but I understand he is going to be on video, so hopefully that will all work out. And when is that? Is that tomorrow? Tomorrow afternoon.
afternoon.
Okay. Okay, but I also understand that there are some very interesting details that he was associated with in terms of this satanic sacrifice of children going on that he's been involved in revealing, both in Canada and really around the world, also associated with the Vatican. And there are other witnesses that have recently come forward talking about this same subject, including Max Spears, who is a super soldier who just died. I think it's been a week at this point. And Camelot has reported on that death. It's a very mysterious death. He was a relatively young man, I think just around 40 years old. And how many people have heard of this, the death of Max Spears? Okay, some of you. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about that, and I also want to say that we're going to be doing some further discussions in the future on Camelot. I have a television, it's internet TV broadcasting. I broadcast live shows almost weekly, depending on my schedule and the availability of the witnesses, the people I interview. So I will be talking more to anyone. I've offered interviews to a lot of the people that are close to Max, and I believe we also have some people here in the audience that had some interactions with Max when he spoke here in Poland recently. So what happens is Kevin Annette was also talking about this international day that you're going to be having here in Europe. I believe it's next week, someone told me. And does anyone in the audience know the date of the day I'm talking about? Some international day. No one knows. Okay. Oh, okay. Very sorry. This seems a lot of echo, but it's also covering my face, so I guess it's not. I don't know what to do about that. Anyway, International Day. There's an International Day that's coming up here in Europe. Do you know what I'm talking about? Does anyone in the audience know what I'm talking about? About a celebration day. Could you give me the date if you know it? Okay, but at any rate, the reason I'm bringing it up is because Kevin Annette had made an announcement, I believe it was him, among other people, and Max Spears also, right before he died, referenced this date as a time when the Vatican and a number of other sort of key locations of dark magicians who are trying to run the planet, basically, who are reptilian bloodline mainly, we're going to be, or are going to be, according to this information, doing a lot of child sacrifice and blood rituals. So this was an effort to reveal this before it happens. Usually in the alternative community, they aren't able to know when these things are going to go on necessarily, or at least be able to reveal them before they happen. Obviously, this was an effort to reveal it before it happens and maybe prevent it. So this is very important. And we don't know exactly why Max Spears was killed. We do know he has been killed. They are doing an autopsy. I've just heard from Miles Johnston just today again, and he has spoken with the mother, and she is, I believe, having an autopsy performed, and this is sometime in the next 24 hours, if I understand correctly. Whether or not the autopsy will show anything, we don't know. We know that his body was not, okay, let me say this. The body, after he died, was kept on the premises of this woman who is a journalist named Monica, and I'm not sure her last name, but apparently she is a Polish citizen and was kept in her villa, and the body was visited by a doctor and a couple of attendants that were part of an ambulance that came to the house to try to revive him. They were unable to do so, but they did a very strange thing. They left the body behind and just left the house. And then also a policeman was called because the woman, Monica, was, I guess, quite agitated and wanted the doctor to work harder or whatever to revive him, and would not let them take the body, would not let the policeman take the body. This is what I've been told. Now, more information may come out in the future, so I can't tell you how accurate this is. I can tell you that I've been in touch with people close to the scene who were in touch with Monica at the time, including the filmmaker, who did a last, it seems to be the last recorded interview with Max before he died. And you can see that he's actually under attack during the interview, and if you watch the interview, you can actually see him apparently having a great deal of trouble with his throat, with talking, and yet he was trying to get the truth out up to the last moment. He did the interview, and a few days later he died. And so the performance by the doctors and the police, at least in terms of the United States where I'm from, were very unusual because normally they would never leave behind a body. And also, in a certain sense, they have no idea how the person really died. There could have been poison involved. They need an autopsy and blood tests and all kinds of things. So there could be a crime scene, and they left the scene of the crime, if there was a crime. And we don't know any of this. We are only speculating based on the evidence that we have. The body was apparently kept there for many hours, maybe even overnight. I'm not sure. We're concerned that some satanic rituals may have taken place or been facilitated long distance. And these people can work, these dark magicians, long distance. So they can do rituals using remote influencing and other methods that we all have in our abilities, by the way. So now I will get a little more into my presentation, if it all works. Okay, the ceremonies that I was referring to that they may be performing child sacrifices on is called World Youth Day. It appears here. It says from the 25th of July, which is Monday, until the 31st of July. And it says it takes place in Krakow, Poland. And on the 31st of July is what they call the central ceremony. So that's just an important date or series of dates to keep in mind. Now, I also, let me see if this is going to, okay. I also want to, maybe I can move this over here. I also want to talk about a little bit about my experience here in Prague. I haven't been back to Prague in this life at all, but in prior lives, I believe I visited Prague. I can tell you that we went up to the castle and we did the tour, and I can tell you that as an intuitive and being fairly psychic, I was aware of a lot of black magic rituals that have taken place over the centuries by people who were ruling this area, and that the church is right smack in the middle of the castle grounds, really, and it's quite a dark structure in and of itself. And many people will know that the Vatican is associated with Satanism. And, I'm sorry to say that what happens is when we're talking about black magicians, we're talking about the people that run or attempt to run the planet, you cannot separate the two. They actually are one and the same, even ones who pretend for the public to really have nothing to do with that sort of thing. Anyone who is in those ruling sort of positions and becomes also a Mason, for example, has access to learning about what's called magic. And magic, of course, is two-sided. It has a light side and a dark side. So this is what we're really talking about. So this type of thing has been going on throughout the ages, and apparently it was quite plentiful here in Prague. Now, even if you look around here in this very strange building that we're in, you can see that it has quite a rather interesting sort of satanic tinge to the architecture, etc. We're also down in what is in essence an underground facility at this time. So, what I would say here is to, before I begin and get into everything else, I wish you would all surround yourself with white light and sort of do your best to, in your minds, to cleanse your auras and to sort of basically release any sort of negativity from the area, and any negative entities can now leave. So I will proceed at this point. There have been some developments in the UFO community, as we call it. And let me ask you, because I hear that my voice is booming through here. Is it okay?
That's great. You sound great. We're happy to be here.
Sorry?
We're happy to be here. You sound great.
Excellent. Okay. So there is something called the NORAD papers that has come forward. They are 11 pages, and this person called Victor Vigiani is now releasing information. I believe he is Canadian, and he set up a conference with some journalists to reveal this information that he came across. And what he did was he sent a request, Freedom of Information Act, which is a United States sort of thing, and sent it to the United States, to NORAD, for information that was freedom of information. And it came back to him with blacked out things, as they always do, but it was referencing UFOs. And a very strange thing happened. He got a letter from a person who appears to be I believe the commander of NORAD, and this is in the United States. So he's a Canadian citizen writing to the Freedom of Information Act to get this information. He gets more than he anticipated back in the mail. And unfortunately for NORAD, or maybe purposefully, and this is where it gets into sort of a convoluted game that goes on in this whole world that we're all a part of, in which there is a great effort to hide the truth from humanity on every level. The secret space program being one of those areas, but not the only one by any means. And I'm going to get more into that as I go. So what happened was he got a letter from this commander, and the commander basically said he was sending Victor information about what went on, tracking what they called, let me see if I can get the name right, hold on one second, tracks of interest is what they called them. So instead of calling them UFOs, they called them tracks of interest. That they did an average of 1,800 tracks of interest, meaning following the craft, and 75 intercepts approximately per year for the last, I believe he said last 5 years, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is the information that he got, along with some other information. However, the letter itself also said to him that this was classified information, that he could not legally release it to the public, and he would be prosecuted by the United States government if he did. Sorry, I'm sweating. So what happens is he did release it to the government, to the public. So he went public with this because this was sent to a person who is in theory not a member of the military and not a member of the Secret Service agencies, but just a concerned public citizen who had a very strong interest in UFOs and getting the truth out. And so he is putting out a challenge to the U.S. government as a Canadian citizen saying, come and arrest me, you sent me this letter, I've now released the information. What this is doing in the UFO community is it's making quite a stir in some areas. And the question is whether it was sent intentionally, whether some secretary made a mistake, he or she, or an intelligence agency intercepted this Freedom of Information Act parcel and stuck something in there. Maybe a concerned group of even a portion of MJ-12, we're told, is interested in getting the truth out to humanity. So this would be sort of a covert way of putting out information. Now, there's very little way for Victor Viggiani, as far as I know, to confirm or deny this information. In other words, NORAD never has to confirm or deny, and the United States can simply ignore the information as if it never happened. We don't know at this point what will happen, but it is an interesting news item, and I thought you should know about it. What we're really talking about is what I would call a soft disclosure. Okay, so that's what we're really looking at. Let me see. Right, so we got that. Overcoat whistleblower, this is the latest whistleblower that came to Camelot, aside from this story to do with Max Spears that just happened. And this is a contractor from Virginia who went through, let's see, he was the end person that sent the stuff to me. It's all about an underground base in Washington, D.C. area. And apparently something that happened during a Camelot interview with Stephen Greer years ago, they say, in which Stephen Greer revealed that Camp Perry, a place called Camp Perry, where they, I believe, used to train military and CIA agents, actually was, a secret underground base. The story goes that the base itself was then moved, packed up and moved into this place called Mount Weather. And Mount Weather is a known base. I think above ground it's known for training, again, of CIA agents and so on. But apparently there is a large underground base there. Now, whether this information is correct, we don't know. But this was sent to me by a person who was given the information by an intermediary, and the person who actually was involved in it, we're calling this the overcoat whistleblower because he was part of a secret black project having to do, I'm not sure exactly, possibly with clones and other things. So it is somebody who's disclosing information, in essence, to Camelot. This is a person who's not going on camera, and in essence, there are 3 people involved in this disclosure. So you're talking about the whistleblower, who is the contractor who sent me the information, and after he sent it to me, he then told me he was going to go black again, which means he's disappearing. And then he said possibly in the future he will send me more information. So we published this, and we don't have a way to really check the information, but it does have some other methods, because you can go to Mount Weather and you can go to, I believe, find out the history behind Camp Perry, etc. What it had accompanying it was 4 or 5 photographs from an underground base. It didn't show you much, to tell you the truth, and that was that. So what happens is the original whistleblower went through an intermediary, supposedly, and then gave the information to this contractor who then got it to me. So that's kind of just showing you what the whistleblower world is about, and sometimes the whistleblowers never go before the camera, and etc. And Camelot has done over 500 video interviews, as you may know, and many years of radio shows with contactees, experiencers, abductees, call them what you will, authors, investigators, and whistleblowers. And our specialty was whistleblowers from above top secret. and we've now been doing this for over 10 years. And I started out with a partner, as many of you know, Bill Ryan. We split up after three and a half years, having changed and diverged in our philosophies of what was going on. And he continued to take over what we started as Project Avalon and created the forum there. And he still is active in the community, so to speak. I went on to continue Camelot on my own, and then the last 3 years, a guy you'll see somewhere in the audience back there and who helped set me up, Neil Sanford, who's a very talented musician, is also helping filming Camelot and helping me with editing and making things like banners and so on. So I do want to give him some credit here. Okay. So the bottom line is that we all live in a matrix, and everyone knows that. What can you do about it? Meditate, meditate, meditate. Spend time in nature. Be concerned about what you put into your body. Try to put as much clean, clear water in there. I can tell you that we are spirit having a material experience, so that in the end, this is simply a vehicle. You are eternal, and so that you can go on beyond this time and space. We occupy, we are multidimensional. We occupy a multitude of bodies simultaneously. Reincarnation is simultaneous because time and space is all simultaneous, all is one, etc. So that's like the quick overview of what's really going on. Now, let me tell you that the information I have comes from my interviews with these people for over 10 years. And so I am not only speaking from myself and my own intuition and my own research, but I am also speaking, in a sense, for all of these other people that I have talked to and interviewed over the years. And so it's a body of knowledge that is actually very substantial. And many of the whistleblowers, and I'll get into the details on the whistleblowers as I proceed, but many of the whistleblowers have come forward, some of them temporarily, some have gone back to work for the powers that be, but they've done so under great stress and sometimes danger and sometimes the threat of death, etc. And some of our whistleblowers have been killed after coming forward. Max Spears, as it happens, was interviewed by Camelot, and I'm not sure if I was one of the first or not, but the first time I interviewed Max Spears, the super soldier who just died, he was accompanying a guy who was also a super soldier. That's the kind of terminology we use to apply to a person who has worked for the secret space program, who has probably been augmented physically, who may be working in the astral planes and sent on assignments there, who is being utilized in experiments, black projects, etc., who may have had their DNA genetically manipulated, etc. Now, I have a lot of these kinds of whistleblowers, and I've been dealing with a lot of them over the 10 years. And it's a very, a deep rabbit hole, I guess you might say. And we're talking about psychological profiling and understanding that there is a very substantial sort of dynamic that goes on between the whistleblower and the people that they disclose to. And that these whistleblowers that we encounter are very important to us and to revealing what's truly going on our planet at this time. So we owe them a debt of gratitude, if you will. They are doing a service for humanity. At the same time, many of them are actually approached after they testify to us and are brought back into black projects. Sometimes they are tracked and killed and so on. I can tell you that at least three of our whistleblowers, aside from Max, who arguably was a whistleblower, have been killed, and that's a Mr. X, one of our first interviewees, who was quite a young man as well, and was about to go even more public than he had done with us, was talking about going on coast-to-coast radio and talking about his experiences. He had come and testified to us after 40 years of silence about having been working in an aerospace company and collecting data and being in a vault and going through organizing data that had to do with the U.S. and other governments, I believe, interaction with ETs, crash retrievals, and so on. And he was collating and getting this information together. He went into work every day, and that was his job. He had another job for aerospace prior to that, and he did volunteer for that particular job. And then he died suddenly over Christmas, just after we had given his testimony at a conference called the Crash Retrieval Conference that was in November. In a couple weeks later, in December, he went out Christmas shopping with his wife. He complained of not feeling well. At about 3 in the morning, she rushed him to a hospital, and he was, dead by noon the next day. I'm not sure what the final diagnosis was, but it was highly suspicious in our view why he died at exactly that moment. Then there has been Brian O'Leary, who is an astronaut that was slated to go to Mars and had been interviewing with basically free energy activists around the planet. George Green, who I don't know if he showed up at all. Lovely to see you, George, who I'm sure gave a stellar performance earlier today, knows Brian very well, or knew Brian very well. Brian invited Bill Ryan and myself to do a conference at his home up on a mountain in Ecuador where he lived. He had left the United States because he believed they were trying to kill him. And he had a very significant incident in which they almost did. He survived. He left the country with his wife and then spent the rest of his days in Ecuador. However, he started to get quite active during the time we knew him, and then at one point he contacted cancer, and less than a year later he was dead. So I consider him to also be having been killed, and I can tell you that he was quite a brilliant man. He's written many books, and you can find them online, as well as watch the interview that we did with him, which is quite excellent. I can also tell you that he was on a television, a pilot that Bill Ryan and I did a pilot for mainstream TV. It was called True TV, that was, revealing some truth. And Jesse Ventura, if you're familiar with that name, had a show before ours called, I think it was called Conspiracy Theory or something like that. Anyway, we were supposed to be the show that came after his show. They did the pilot episode, and Brian O'Leary did testify in that pilot. So you can go online and on my channel and watch that pilot, and you will see his testimony. Now, right before he died, he called us up after they had shot the pilot. It took them over a year to edit it, and then they basically put it on the shelf for 2 years. And so he died during that process. But sometime after he did the testimony, he had revealed that he believed he was, people were trying to kill him and so on his testimony on that pilot for mainstream TV. And then he called us up and asked us if we would remove his testimony. All of a sudden, he was afraid, and he was in quite a state. And basically, we weren't in charge of the pilot anyway, but I can say that I refused to ask them to remove the footage, but they wouldn't have listened to me anyway, because they tried to fire me from the pilot as it happened. They weren't successful, and I have to thank Bill Ryan for this, because Bill Ryan stuck to his guns and said, no, I'm not doing this pilot unless Kerry is with me in it. So we insisted that we both do the pilot together. They wanted me out of there because they wanted Bill to be more like a Jesse Ventura, the big strong man by himself, kind of, saving the world, whatever. So, there's a lot of discrimination in Hollywood against women, and I'm sure you've heard that. I don't normally talk about that sort of thing, and I could whatever. But it doesn't affect me much in this world that I'm part of normally. But going into the Hollywood scene and trying to make a pilot and a TV series, you come across this kind of thing. Now, on top of it, there were a number of very interesting things happened during the shooting of that pilot. And just so that you understand, one thing that happened regards another one of our whistleblowers who died rather recently, and his name was Gordon Novell. Gordon Novell is in that pilot. He has a couple scenes in that pilot, and Gordon Novell was a CIA agent. And his whole life, most of the time, he would deny that he was, but he was. And right during the shooting of that pilot, he called us on the phone. He was in the hotel, you know, the same hotel or whatever, and he asked to speak to our producer. And he told me that, yes, I am a CIA agent. And he finally admitted this after denying it to my face for many years. And then he said that he had an offer that the CIA wanted to make the producer of the TV pilot. And so I connected the two of them. And basically, the deal was that they were going to make for him was that if they would take the TV series and put it under the purview and control of the CIA, that we would go forward and we would have a series and so on and so forth. And that was their offer. Otherwise, probably not. So what happened is that the producer at that time was a person who had principles, I guess you might say, and was a young producer, or is, and said no, he would not do that. And so what happened is, of course, our pilot was then, it was buried. They finally aired it too late. It was put on the shelf. Then they aired it without any advertising whatsoever. We had some devoted fans that let us know they were going to advertise it. We went out and got a copy of it, and everyone else, it kind of died, but it had an audience. However, then they just killed it, and we just put it on YouTube, and it's been on our channel ever since. But this is the kind of thing that goes on behind the scenes, and since we were witness to it, I think it is quite interesting. So most of this is known. Now, I just want to say that over all the years that I've been doing this, there seem to be two clear paths for humanity that sort of emerged out of all the testimony that I was able to hear. And the bottom line is that there is a choice that humans have at this time to go down one of two paths. One is I have just called angelic human, for lack of a better name, and the other is basically robotic Superman. So they're self-explanatory in nature, more or less, but the idea here is that the Illuminati, the secret space program, has a methodology. They have an overall aim for what they're doing here on planet Earth, and it involves creating a humanity, what you might say 3.0 or 4.0, however you want to look at it. And that involves enhancement through robotics, through bioengineering, and through nanotechnology and artificial intelligence on the one hand. And they don't want to wait for humanity, on the other hand, to utilize this vehicle, which has got a built-in abilities to have what are in essence superpowers and high telepathy and all kinds of abilities to create a reality of which we are, as humans, only tapping into on a very small level at this time. And this does involve utilizing things like the so-called junk DNA, which is not junk, and so on and so forth. And a lot of this stuff is all being activated at this time. But the bottom line is also that what they want to do is they want power over. So that is also a very important distinction between the two sides. So the one side is called service to self, and they want power over others in whatever they do. And the other side is about service to humanity. So oftentimes at the end of interviews, you will see me shake someone's hand and say, thank you for your service to humanity. So that's why I say that, because that's what it's all about. So, in essence, as many of you know, we have two civilizations now going parallel here on this planet. One, in essence, has space travel, as Richard Allen Miller, one of our whistleblowers, says, who is a physicist and was more or less a black magician who has now gone over to the light. He left the service of the secret space program after a crisis of conscience, and he is now a speaker out on the sector, and you may know of him. I've interviewed him a number of times. I highly recommend those interviews. But that's what's really going on. So we have a culture of secrecy that has been going on now for millennia, really. And it behooves you and the people that are watching this video to do your own research, to document all of this. We have been told that in essence there is one man in charge of some of the major continents, and so that the triangle, the pyramid that everyone talks about, does go up many levels. It is said that the very top echelon is occupied by certain ET races, and they are sort of occupying, maybe through boots in the ground type of thing, or even possession, the people that have chosen the dark side, in essence, to try to rule and take control of this planet. So we have a war, what is in essence a war of worlds going on. And this war of worlds was here and in operation long before we got here. And in fact, I can say that that in essence, if you want to view the Earth, and Camelot is all about the big picture. So if you understand where I'm going with this, you understand that looking at the big picture is a way to pull back and to get out of the details of all of it and to start to see what we're really a part of as souls. And that's crucial. So what we're really talking about is a war of worlds in which one group of humanity is in essence feeding off, like a parasite-host relationship, the other. And the average person, there's no such thing as an average person in my view, but you know, the general populace, the masses, who don't have the money and are not part of the dark side, are in essence the parasite, and the other side is the host. So the masses are, in essence, the host. We are hosting this outgrowth of our species to create and to do all of what they're doing. And they have been feeding off us in literal and pragmatic form throughout the ages. And of course, there is a whole philosophy that is involved in all of this. Now, we know that 3D is involved with two polarities, dark and light. And this is how it operates. Now, let me say that I've done many presentations, and a lot of this information is out there, and it's on Camelot. So I'm going to kind of like move ahead quickly here because I have limited time, and because this is being filmed, and we have quite a limited audience. So it's a great opportunity for me to go into areas that I don't normally talk about because I simply don't get that far into my presentation. So I'm going to sort of speed ahead. And I'm going to ask, is anyone having trouble understanding English in the audience? You raise your hand. Okay, great. Excellent. And is anyone in the audience simply not familiar with Project Camelot? Raise your hand. Okay, so anyone who made it here apparently knows more or less what we're about. Just a footnote here, I do highly recommend for people that want to hand a book to somebody in their world who still questions whether UFOs are real, in essence, whether there are such things as ETs and whether they visit this planet, and whether our military has anything to do with them. UFOs in the National Security State, there are, I think, there's at least 2 volumes, they're about that thick each, by Richard Dolan, a former Rhodes Scholar, if I remember his background accurately. He has gone through and documented, not just in the United States, but worldwide, UFO sightings by people that were highly credible, including large groups of people, as well as like the Phoenix Lights, which is famous, but other individual sightings by pilots, members of the police force, retired and current, military officers, et cetera, and it's a huge amount of data, just gigantic. So if we were in a court of law, the evidence has proven far and away that, you know, these things we call UFOs are real, that ETs are real, et cetera, that the documentation is just prolific at this point. And for Camelot, it's absolutely a fait accompli. Now, if you take a look at the NRO emblem of the octopus feeding on the earth, this is exactly the relationship that I'm talking about. So you have a visual, this is their emblem. It's amazing that they are, as always, so out in the open, so showing you right in your face what they're doing to you and who they are and what they prize above all other things. They prize bloodlust, they feed on you, and so on and so forth. So within someone, and I'm going to keep referring back to this because it's a great example, someone like Max Spears, you're talking about what is in essence a person who has been in essence MyLabbed. So even maybe from birth, he could have been augmented. His mother's could have had some things happen to her before the birth, and so on and so forth. Dan Sherman is one of our whistleblowers, and he in fact was told by the military while he was still in the military. He was brought into his officer's office and told that his mother was impregnant while he was in her womb. He was actually augmented to become part of the secret space program, so that many years later, when we had what they were planning for the future, and understanding that these individuals planned for the future years and years in advance, that they used, at one time they used something called Cray computers, but now it's so far in advance of that, they're using artificial intelligence, and so on. But in essence, what happened is they programmed him to take care of a situation during an EMP that was planned to hit the United States at least, sometime in the future, that they would need these sort of intuitive communicators to deal with certain ET races at that time, and he was one of those people. So he's written a book called Above Black. It's an excellent book. I recommend it. It's free. I think it's free on the internet at this point. I actually tried to get it made into a movie when I used to work in Hollywood, and I worked in Hollywood for almost 20 years. I didn't get very far, but I did try to shop projects, sci-fi projects that would reveal the truth about what's really going on. And that's how I really got into this field, although I had studied Eastern philosophy and as many people may have heard me speak about, joining my chakras, going through Kundalini activation sort of experiences, and having samadhi experiences associated with that, and that continues to this day. So I won't have time to talk about Kundalini during this session, but I will be talking more in the future about that. So mind control is a huge part, it's a huge part of this whole scenario, and that involves your televisions, the fluorescent lights that we live under a lot of the time, especially in office buildings, everything that you can think of, the food, the water, et cetera, the chemtrails. It's all about controlling the planet and dumbing you down. And even since the Anunnaki first put in what is in essence a sort of a frequency fence block in your consciousness, in your brain, and this has permeated to all of humanity apparently, which we are breaking down at this time and breaking through. But basically it was all about dumbing you down, because what happened through time is that this vehicle, you don't have to reinvent the wheel in essence. This vehicle is perfectly capable of bringing you to what's called enlightenment and beyond, and giving you superpowers, et cetera, and all of this is linked to things that yogis call in the East Kundalini activation, and in the West it's known as orgone. So anyway, so mind control is part of this, and it's a very big part of it. And MK Ultra is in the public domain, so to speak. So you can research MK Ultra and get a tremendous amount of evidence to substantiate all of this. Okay, so now I'm just going to go really far forward. Bottom line is, I think it's time that humanity stop looking to see if UFOs are real, which is nonsense because, of course, they are. The UFO, the only question you have is, who's driving the craft? Is it ours or is it theirs, so to speak? Is it ET or is it, the humans? And many times it's a combination of both is what happens. And I myself have had multiple UFO sightings. I was abducted as a child. I have memories of this, and so on. So what happens is, in essence, if you want to look at it on a sort of 3D going into 4D, and we're very much moving into 4D and in essence in 4D now on this planet, and the difference between 3D and 4D is in 4D, you no sooner think of something than it actually can manifest. And it's a time differential. So in the past, when you wanted to create something in reality, you would think of it, then you would work on it, you would try to communicate with others to make it happen, etc. Now that time is really diminished, and sometimes it's actually instantaneous. And sometimes, if you're aware of our nature as time-traveling entities, which is just part of this vehicle and your abilities, you will know that you can actually precog the future. So in some ways, you can live the future before it happens and then see it happen before your eyes. And this happens to me all the time. It's called déjà vu, and there are other words for it as well. So, in essence, according to Ashiana Dean, who is one of my, if you want to call her a whistleblower in a sense, and she is a contactee, who considers herself not to be channeling, but to be getting what are in essence downloads. And the difference would be that lots of channeling does go on, but a lot of times the channeling requires the individual to kind of move over to the side, get out of the way, and then the channel comes through that vehicle. Whereas with Ashiana Dean, she is conscious during the interaction, so she's in a sense having a dialogue with whoever is contacting her. And in her case, it's called the Guardians. The Guardians are a group of races who take credit for shepherding humanity through these kinds of trials that we go through. And in essence, some of whom have contributed their DNA to actually this vehicle, creating this vehicle we call human. So in essence, we have been in battle, and the ETs, we call them ETs. There are some interdimensionals. There are some that are under the planet. There are some that consider this planet their own forever, but just lumping them all into sort of a bucket, calling it ETs just for simplicity, I can say that they have been in battles for eons before this planet was ever terraformed and made into a place where humans, or this humanoid species, this experiment called human, could be advanced. And I can also tell you that the evidence is pretty prolific that we are made up of at least 12 or more ET races, and at this point many more. We have been invaded over and over and over again. Various ET races have done experiments using us and contributing to the DNA, kind of in essence, the genetic library of which we are a part. And that this planet is considered to be a very valuable water world. It's very desirable, and I'll explain more about that due to my testimony from another whistleblower called Captain Mark Richards. But in essence, Ashiana Dean, one of the valuable things she's contributing is the understanding that this experiment we call human is also about putting boots on the ground from all these various races who have been fighting with each other into one vehicle, into multiple renditions, you might say, of these souls incarnating. It is a place of learning, obviously, but it is also a place where these ETs can inhabit these bodies and have an earthly experience and learn to get along, learn to progress, learn to reach enlightenment in essence. So we have a number of adversaries, and one of the interesting things is with this kind of paternalistic society of which we are a part is they don't want you to know that you are prey, because they don't want you to protect yourself, for one thing. And so, in essence, humanity, yes, we have many, as I say, the guardian races. There are guardian races who are on our side, if you want to call it that. There are some races that are kind of in the middle, and there are races that do not have our best interests in mind and have been warring with other races and would like to see us leave the planet, or they may want to use us as slaves and food sources, etc., etc. So this is a list of some of the names of races that prey on humans, most of whom, or many of whom, people that are really into what we kind of designate as sort of a new age sensibility, tend to think are positive, and many are not necessarily positive. They can have a positive side. They can be utilizing you for a purpose that is positive for a while and then may, in essence, turn against you or humanity, and so on. So these are some of the labels that they go by, and it's a very complex picture. I can tell you and refer you to the Ashanandina Voyager 1 and 2 books as being the best history of humanity that I've ever come across, and that includes the Bible and all the books associated with the so-called Bible. The bottom line also being that Dracos are a big enemy of humanity, but there is also a serpent race, that is, of which there are, I think I've heard 5 species here on Earth at this time. There may be more. Certainly there are more hybrids. And I can tell you that there are very substantial serpent races that are also our enemy. So the bottom line is the War of the Worlds. We have what is in essence an astrophysicist who is highly regarded called James McKenney. And recently he talked about what is in essence, he's really revealing a lot of sort of disclosure on his own, coming from a scientist. And again, our society respects scientists big time. And mainstream science, of course, is back in the dark ages in essence. But for the ones that are trying to push the envelope, there are a few notable scientists who are actually doing just that. And James McKenney has written a book, From Atlantis to Tesla, that I recommend. And he is talking also about what is in essence the ability, and actually Joseph Farrell as well, an author who specializes on our Nazi past, who has now sort of branched out and started to include a history of humanity that involves ET races and warfare that was interplanetary warfare. And his books are quite interesting in this regard. He talks about the Great Pyramid being used as a weapon. It's also an ascension chamber, and so on. So it is interesting that they have witnessed what James McKenney did was, and I'm not sure which slide this is, but in essence, there was a recent sighting of what was in essence appeared to be a comet, I think maybe even more than one comet, near the sun that bombarded with the sun, and then hitting the sun, a solar flare bounced out. And what happens, the comet was aimed. That's a conclusion. And the back channel chatter in terms of black projects, etc., people that I guess are communicating with McKenney said that ETs have the ability to conduct wars with each other, and now also including the Earth. And Atlantis was sunk by a targeted meteor at one point. Atlantis had 2 sinkings, from what I understand. And so that recently they saw a comet being aimed at the sun. Out came a solar flare. If the solar flare is aimed, if the comet is aimed in such a way that solar flare could be aimed and then come back and hit Earth. Why that matters is because you have a guy named Ed Dames, who is a CIA agent, and there's no such thing as a retired CIA agent, in essence, but he considers his mission to go out and tell people about a possible solar flare incident. And the interesting thing about this is here we have James McCanney talking about how these various races and part of the secret war that's going on above our heads can involve targetings using things like comets. And then you have this so-called CIA agent telling you that there's going to be a flare aimed at us at some point. So it's not a natural event. And a lot of this stuff, you know, a lot of the things, earthquakes, a lot of the plans for the future, a lot of the things that involve so-called things like Armageddon. And this brings to mind my interview with Leo Zagami, who was a whistleblower from out of the Vatican, who's still out on the circuit now. I can say he was possessed by what is in essence some people may call the devil, whatever, at one point. I have documented evidence of that. I think he might have gotten out from under that to some degree, but I wouldn't say he's completely sort of distanced himself from what's called the P2 Lodge, which is a lodge of black magicians. And sometimes I think they're at odds with the Vatican and their magicians having an internal war. But I digress. So in essence, what we're really talking about is these things that they call catastrophes are not acts of God. The God they're referring to in the Bible, 9 times out of 10, are the Anunnaki. They're not gods at all. They have all the same human proclivities, etc. And so there's this whole problem with humanity worshiping, and this goes for whether it's rock stars or, you know, whatever the latest celebrity thing is, or authorities, so-called doctors, this whole sort of mind control program for humans to, in essence, worship or allow others to sit above them and tell them what is right and what is wrong. When in reality, you have within this vehicle and as part of spirit, your own heart and mind, which can resonate together to give you an indication of what is true and what is false. You know when you're hearing it, even as sort of screwed up as you may be, your body will know what's truth and what's falsity. And it's very important to begin to listen to that. And it will be more important in the future than it is even at this exact moment on planet Earth. And it could save your life if you want to save your earthly body at any rate. So, okay, so some people really want to know, what do ETs want? And I have a whistleblower called Captain Mark Richards from the Secret Space Program. I've interviewed him at Vacaville Prison in Northern California now 4 times. When I interview him, I go with his wife, Joanne Richards, a lovely woman who helps facilitate and make this possible. We sit in this prison area where visitors go. I'm not allowed to have any recording equipment. God knows why, because they're not very dangerous. I mean, they could hardly hurt anybody with this. However, I'm not allowed to have that. I can only have a little tiny pencil like that, which always runs out of lead partway through the interview, and so to take notes with. But I have a very good ability to recall information. And what happens is I leave the prison, I spend 4 hours talking to him face to face, with him sitting, you know, about this far away, like an arm's length, and looking straight into his eyes, asking him question after question about the secret space program that he worked in for, I think, something like, he's kind of born into it because his father was an officer in it. His father was well known as someone called the Dutchman, and also worked with the British side of the secret space program. That's all one, really, with the U.S. And in essence, he has an amazing amount of information to share. So if you haven't heard those interview recalls, which is what they really are, I do recommend them. A year ago, on the way to interview him, I was in a hotel and I was struck by a scalar weapon and made ill, and the side of my head and face was distorted basically, and I had to get a lot of healing to get it repaired and so on. But I recovered, but I can tell you that the information I got was that I had a choice at that point to leave the planet, to, allow that to kill me, or to stay and, go through this whole recovery process. So I elected to stay because it wasn't going to be their choice when I left, and basically put on my website saying, next time you're going to have to kill me to stop me from doing what I'm doing. And I have, over the years, gotten death threats, and we've had things happen to us in the early days with Bill Ryan as well, and things continue to happen whenever they decide to sort of try to hit me with something. But I can say I have a lot of protection, and I have a lot of connection with my higher self and so on. So I've come here on a mission, as we all have, and I'm certainly interested in seeing this mission through. And I think that that all of you are part of this mission. You have your own missions. Each person has a very special gift to contribute to this overall sort of basically awakening of humanity. And as we awaken, the consciousness field changes. And it is actually not so necessary that people take action. It is important to take action. It can be useful, but it's not the only thing that will change the parameters for the Earth at this time. What in essence happens is when you change your consciousness, your entire field changes. Humans learn from each other through osmosis. Right now we're creating a field in this room, in fact. The ripples from this field will go out into the city of Prague, up and beyond, out into Europe. The powers that be know this, the dark magicians know this. They use groupings of humanity to take the energy and try to steer it in their direction. And if, Evan's emphasis here. So this is what goes on. And in essence, we are able to send scalar energy out that will actually change the paradigm. And it doesn't take that many awakened humans to do this sort of thing, just as it doesn't take a lot of dark magicians to do a negative act. And of course, you will hear tomorrow from Ole Damagard, who is an expert at analyzing all of the false flags that are in essence magical, dark magical acts to change the field, to change the trajectory, and to get things done that they want to see happen. So we're really interested in awakening humans. And what happens when you awaken or start to awaken is, without even realizing it, you start to change the decisions you make about your life. And you start to radiate more towards the light than towards the dark. And that it is that process, that polarization, if you will, that is really important to the Earth at this time. And the Earth herself will resonate to this. Now, so one of the things that Mark Richards talks about that isn't commonly out there that much is the intervention of these beings and how they took control of what is in essence the dark side and using it to their own ends with their own plan in place. The interesting thing about the secret space program and their role in all of this is that there are some beings, some humans, some hybrids, whatever, who have become aware that the secret space program kind of made a deal with the devil. And the devil was basically not having humanity's best interest at heart, not even the so-called wealthy, not even the so-called dark side's interest at heart, that they had another sort of agenda of all of their own. And so what has happened is some of the members of the military and the various police and other government officials and so on are starting to realize that they kind of put their lot in, if you will, with the losing side. And inevitably, the dark will lose. It's simply the way of these worlds, going back to, you know, if you can visualize, to what in essence you could call the force, the creator, whatever you want to call this this amazing sort of thing that generates all of this. Now, so they have started to change sides. And this is an interesting process because you also get some of the banker deaths, for example, would have been whistleblowers, would have been members of this sort of dark side, this Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, who wanted to cross over, wanted to reveal what's going on, and then were suicided, made to jump off buildings and kill themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And you get members of the secret space program and military who are, we call them wearing white hats. And, you know, excuse what appears to be a somewhat racist designation, you know, white, light and dark, black and white. It's difficult, but we're not talking about skin color here. We're talking about a certain kind of, you know, going toward the light as opposed to the dark and so on. So in essence, there is a transition that's going on in the secret services and in all of these levels around us. That does not mean that the fight is over. It does not mean that all the reptilians have now left the earth, you know, and there's a lot of new age junk out there that is made to disarm humanity. And it's very important that humanity not be deceived by these so-called people who appear to be on the new age, appear to be walking in the light, and are in essence serving the dark. They may not know it. That's important. It's important to know that a lot of people in their naivete often serve the dark. And you can imagine yourself working some dead-end job for some company that you just, you know, got hired by. And the company is basically doing some very diabolical things like Monsanto or whoever they are. And you don't wake up until many years later. And at some point, you had been serving the dark. That's the reality. So you can imagine a whistleblower who spends 40 years or more as a scientist being lured into working for them, being only in your little silo of working on whatever little experiments you were working on, and then waking up and your head sort of lifting up and looking around and all of a sudden realizing you're part of something extremely dark. And that gets into people like the Lockheed scientists that went on the run from Lockheed Martin, which is an aerospace company in California and elsewhere in the world, but it's mainly based in the United States or comes from the United States. And in essence, several of them went on the run. Some of them started dying because they were working on a grid of nanosatellites that would go around the Earth. They were inventing them. They were giving them artificial intelligence. And at a certain point, they decided to give them sort of a test to see what the chances are that these nanosatellites would turn against humanity sometime in the future. And I think they found something like a 60% chance, at which point the scientists working on them decided they didn't really want to continue working on them with these odds. And some of them started to end up dead. Some other scientists started to notice their colleagues disappearing. And then a few of them went on the run. Now, the reason we know about this is because luckily one or two of them contacted a guy named Anthony Sanchez, who is a UFO researcher who I've interviewed several times, who has received multiple death threats because of this information that I'm giving you, and who's tried to write a book about it, who was also given some technical specs. And I was contacted by an agent in one of the agencies and told to relay a message to Anthony for the dark side, or the people in power, if you want to call them that, some of whom don't consider themselves dark, but for what it's worth, who told me to tell Anthony Sanchez that if he released these technical specs that he was given to the world, that he would be in violation of the U.S. national security, and that in essence his family might be killed, and so on and so forth. He may not be here to live to see the next day, etc. And so I relayed this message to Anthony. So far his book I don't think has come out, but I know that he probably won't be including these specs in there. But this information I'm giving you is about what's called Project Leonid. And it's very real. And as it happened, I ran into a whistleblower in a very unusual place, or at least for, for what I think is an unusual place, an airport. Maybe intentional, obviously, but nonetheless, who recognized me as being from Project Camelot, who happened to be working on satellites, who happened to be also working on the Gulf oil spill, and was able to reveal quite a bit of information to me, as well as what is called, in essence, this sort of Skynet-type entity or artificial intelligence that goes above the nanosatellites and is sort of the final level of artificial intelligence, and they call it Mother. So I've had some verification of that terminology. Anyway, Dr. Pete Peterson is another whistleblower who is very crucial to this overall story involving what is in essence Skynet, surveillance of humanity, and interacting with ETs, as well as what is called a chip that is part of the Skynet chip that is supposed to be a fail-safe chip that can is supposed to even stop ET intervention in switching what are in essence sort of a group of I guess androids or whatever, an army of soldiers that are at the ready, sort of in underground bases, and we're told China has a number of these as well, and that they are all under the command of this thing, this Skynet chip, and that if an ET race, who we are supposedly battling for control of Earth over, was to suddenly intervene and take control of the Skynet chip, then they would have control of all these armies that have been created. So this is, I know it sounds like science fiction, but it's actually science fact. And this is documented by various people I've interviewed, but Dr. Pete Peterson is one of the key sources of this information. He's a Black project scientist who worked in the projects since his youth, and at one point he met with myself, David Wilcock, and Bill Ryan, and we spent 3 days with him in which he talked from morning through to 4 o'clock in the morning, so round the clock, nonstop, for 3 days, talking to us about his experiences and what he'd come across, because he was having a crisis of conscience, as whistleblowers do, and he had been retired from working in Black projects, but he was still a very active individual, and he basically disclosed a great deal of information to us. He did it all off camera, and then he told us at the end of the 3 days, okay, in the late afternoon, now you can turn on your cameras. If you haven't seen my interview with Dr. Pete Peterson, and it's a joint interview again with 3 of us, it's 6 hours long, as I recall, and of all 3 parts, the one part he wanted removed was the one that I did, which is the last section, and it talks about this Terminator, and in essence I ask him some very direct questions, to which he tells me, sometimes he answers me saying, if I told you, I in essence would have to kill you, or someone will kill you if you take this information anywhere, and so on. So those kinds of dialogues were going on between us. He's a very interesting guy and obviously highly intelligent. So, Mark Richards talks about why aliens want to take control of this planet. There are multiple reasons. It appears that human females are utilized by many races, especially maybe more negatively based, but possibly also some positive based races, to become, in essence, a genetic playground where they can use the DNA of humanity and germinate, some kind of a being, whatever, that would be a combination of their DNA and ours, and so on and so forth. So this kind of thing is going on around the planets, around the systems, solar systems, etc. There's so many uses of humanity. I don't even want to go into all of them. But it is important that humans start to realize that they do have predators out there that are actually very real. And aside from the dark magicians and the reptilians here on the planet that prey on your children, and the reason so many children do go disappeared, some of whom were maybe taken off the planet for positive reasons to work in the secret space program, and etc. Others will be used as food and sacrificial victims, etc. So this is really what we're looking at. There is energy from a blood sacrifice that can be utilized by a magician, by a being, either taken in through sort of a magical use of the Kundalini energy, and then in a sense, a certain kind of transmutation that will then be actually transmuted to be used to do certain acts and so on. So, let's see. It is important to know that some of the beings are fully inhabited, and we also have a lot of cloning going on, and cloning of governmental leaders. And we've had multiple testimony in this regard over the years, and I think earlier today, I certainly hope, that George Green covered a little bit about cloning. Did you do that? Excellent. Okay, so I don't have to say too much about that. I'm assuming everyone was here earlier. We do have some heroes in our midst, and in my view, we are all heroes, potential Christs, saviors of humanity. It's simply your choice whether you wish to be one or not. And certainly these individuals listed here are among them. Okay, let's see. So, when I talk about these subjects, a lot of times, I hope you will sort of forgive me, but I am a bit, dry or sarcastic or whatever, because a lot of these subjects are now being covered everywhere. And there's a lot of sort of disclaimers and a lot of sort of things that you need to say just to make everyone happy out there, so that I do want people to realize that I'm aware that the Illuminati is a bucket terminology, that there are many sort of divisions within the higher ranks, and there are wars, small little skirmishes going on daily within these individuals and their groups, and so on. There does seem to be, and we were told in early days by Dan Burish, for example, that there is kind of a strong split within what is, in essence, what became MJ12 and a much larger organization that has more than 12 members, that on one side of the sort of aisle sit the Luciferians, and on the other side on the Nazis. They have a distaste for each other, I'm told. Some people cross over and occupy both ranks, and so on. So this Rockefeller-Rothschild divide is real. It does go on. They do play a lot of games between each other, but in the end they are united, and in their drive for a new world order, their only discussion is over who is going to be in charge, as always, who's going to be on top. So that's what we're really talking about, but they are unified, and a person who I highly recommend, I've interviewed him a number of times. I have an excellent interview with him, the main one, with Jordan Maxwell, is a person who has studied the symbolism of the Illuminati in your cities, Prague being a prime example. He can basically tell you the words, the symbols, what they really mean, why the Illuminati have them out there, etc., etc. He has studied this information for the past. He's quite elderly at this point, but I think maybe he would say 50 years, maybe 60. Most of his life, he is very well regarded in this as being an expert in this area. He's not the only one. There are a lot of people who are learning how to read symbols and symbolism. But I do want to recommend him in case you're in doubt about what I'm talking about in terms of the overall, in essence, an Illuminati agenda and something that has been going on through history. Because when you see these ancient sites and you see them inscribed with these symbols, it's amazing how they link up around the world. So, right, I've kind of covered that. Yeah, we have, I mean, they have bases on, I'm studying what are the most obvious things. They have bases on the moon and Mars. They have interplanetary space travel. They are terraforming the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and so on. And all of this, again, I have interviews with many, many, many whistleblowers and source information. Let me say that I also, on my website, we put out written information. So if you have a whistleblower who won't go on camera, who also won't do audio, we will basically release their testimony in a written form. Sometimes it will be paraphrased, and sometimes it will be quoted directly. But we will give them a false name to protect their identity, etc. So we have thousands of pages of written material in which I'm also talking about these subjects. So if you go back to my blog over many years, you will find this information, as well as Camelot in the early days. Joseph Farrell has lately been bringing forward information about the creation of creatures, and the Dulce base is famous for this, as a place where they were doing things like they did at the time of Atlantis, which is, in essence, taking human DNA and combining with various animals and so on to create, very, very violent animals that they want to do their bidding. And if you saw, I forget the name of the movie, but anyway, there are many movies in which you see these like large dog-like creatures that are very vicious, more large and more vicious than any regular dog, and these are genetically engineered creatures. And also on the sides of all the churches, you can often see these combinations of griffins and snakes and lizards and all kinds of things. So these are beings that were also used and apparently are being created again to be used in maybe future wars and things that may be going on in underground bases beneath the earth. And also underground bases are also undersea bases, and a lot of stuff going on with regard to that. There is a history of the beginnings of what we call the secret space program that goes directly back to the Nazis. They, in essence, did not lose the war. They simply moved locations to the United States, which they are running at this time, and also Great Britain, and working with the dark magicians, and then to places like Argentina and I think it's Bolivia, and anyway, they have underground bases and places where also Antarctica. We're talking about something called New Berlin, and all of this is ongoing stuff. And good researchers to read their books about it, again, are Jim Marrs and Joseph Farrell, but there are certainly others. So this is a statement by Jim Marrs all about Project Paperclip and the early days of the secret space program. And Jim has written over 10 books, and we wanted him to speak here, actually. We were not able to get him to fly over. He had some extenuating personal circumstances that didn't allow him to come at this time, maybe sometime in the future. Okay, I'm going to go even further. Eisenhower, famous statements, obviously, everyone knows about that. I do have information about the early days of what is called, what is in essence promised software, which are the early days of the artificial intelligence that is now running this planet and probably orchestrating everything to do with the financial system. And that story is very interesting. Danny Castellero is a journalist who was killed for investigating this, and it all pointed to the financial fraud and the things that are going on now. All of this was thoroughly investigated by Danny before he was suicided. He was found dead in his bathtub somewhere in the South, right before he was supposed to do an interview with somebody. Michael Riconosciuto is a very interesting player in all of this story, and I can tell you that he is in prison in California, I believe still, if indeed that's where he is. He is like Mark Richards, this other person I interviewed. In other words, he's a person who goes back many years at this point and was there in the early days. He was one of the people that was supposedly who put a software backdoor into what was called Promise software and started this sort of process in which it became, in essence, the artificial intelligence and tracking software. I was sort of joking with my partner about the fact that, in essence, airports are a facade at this point. There is absolutely no need for a human being to be in an airport other than the passenger. So you could be going through all the surveillance technology. You don't need any humans there to search you or any of this nonsense. It's all bogus anyway, because most of the terrorism, if not all, is orchestrated. And this, they just create, in essence, a boogeyman. They target certain races and decide to build them up into the enemy so that they can continue their war, continue their sale of weapons, etc. And a lot of this stuff that we know of as human trafficking and drug trafficking and nefarious financial dealings, a lot of this stuff is all funneling into a pipeline that is funding, in essence, this rogue civilization we call the secret space program. There is more than one secret space program. China has their own, from what I understand. Russia, United States, and Great Britain are partners within the secret space program. So that's significant. It is significant that wars are orchestrated and planned in advance. And this recent racial unrest in the United States was predicted and told to us in absolutely point-blank terms by a guy named Michael Prince, who is a super soldier, who was one of the people I interviewed with Max Spears. I did an interview back in, I think it was 2013, with Max Spears and Michael Prince. At the time, Max Spears was a younger super soldier. He was under the control of Michael Prince. So in the interview, you will see Max Spears sitting there, looking quite young, different than right before he died. And he is basically sort of subordinate to Michael Prince, who dominates the interview. During that interview, Michael Prince, who is right now in prison but going to get out in, I'm told, around 18 months or less, tells me on the interview that the Illuminati's plan is to actually orchestrate racial wars in the near future in the United States. And at the time, I actually kind of laughed and I said, "You're kidding, that is so old school, I can't believe people would buy into that." And he said, "Doesn't matter, that's their plan." And this is the interview in which he freely admits working for the Fourth Reich and being proud of it. So this is what we're talking about. Okay, all of that has been said. And I've explained about why that, am I going backwards? Let's see. Okay, I do have quite a long presentation. I'm going to skip ahead here to the psychology of whistleblowers, and in essence are key whistleblowers. So these are some of the key whistleblowers. Just a couple notes on some of these people, and I'll show you their pictures. Not sure if I got all the pictures right at this point, but anyway, where you see Tony Dodds was also known as John Roby. We gave him that false name. He was a UK police detective who was rather tied in with their sort of upper echelon of the ruling class, I guess you might say, and some high levels of the intelligence communities, probably. But at any rate, he liked our work. He contacted us out of the blue. He wanted to keep secret, and he did tell us that this thing called Torchwood, which was at the time a UK series that then became a US television series, was real. That in essence, that they do have means and ways of tracking ETs that are visiting here, that are walking around the planet looking like you and I, sometimes not so much like you and I, sometimes, wearing hoods and various things to camouflage themselves. In essence, he said they do track these individuals. Sometimes they kill them, sometimes they capture them, sometimes they work with them, and so on. But this is an ongoing situation. And he said that information, he wanted us to know about it, but he said we could be putting our lives in danger if we released it, and we released it anyway. Then he subsequently has died a couple of years ago, so we now tell people his real name. Who else? Well, I've talked about several of these people. Certainly Henry Deacon, Arthur Neumann. These are key whistleblowers that came in the very early days of Camelot, and some of whom have continued to interact with me, even behind the scenes. And I'm not going to name who those are, but they are among them. So many people will know about Robert O'Dean. He is a person who broke his security oath to come and tell the public what was really happening regarding the secret space program and the agenda of, in essence, the dark side. He is a person who is over 85 at this time and very well loved around the world as a whistleblower. I've done at least 4 interviews, maybe more, with him on video. Dan Burish is very well known. The last contact I had with Dan Burish, both of he and Marcia McDowell, his partner, Marcia McDowell, at one point turned against Camelot. They professed to be friends of ours initially and give us quite a lot of good information, some of which checked out very well. One of the things they told us in the early days was that Hillary Clinton was going to run for office in 2016 and that she would win. So far, half of that is true, and it is going to be interesting to see if the other half proves true. It does look like it's headed that way. He apparently was part of MJ-12, or claimed to be. He said that his sort of, I don't know if it was a literal father or a paternal father, whatever, was a guy named Mike McConnell, who was head of the DIA and Defense Intelligence Agency. And let's see, I think at this time he's head of, anyway, it's a sophisticated member of the aerospace community. Anyway, he talked about a lot of things to us, but eventually they turned against us. They threatened us in a letter, and this was when the other person in this picture, the picture next to him, Henry Deacon, Arthur Neumann, went on camera, on stage in Barcelona at the Exopolitics conference there, and right after Bob Dean had spoken and done a wonderful presentation all about Mars, Henry Deacon went with myself onto stage, announced that he had been working on Mars as a scientist in black projects, and that he could go through what was in essence a kind of a jump gate and go there for lunch if he wished, but he was also working alongside ETs. He said all this on stage, and then we were asked to leave the stage. The Exopolitics organizers asked us to leave the stage at the time, in spite of the fact that they had paid his way to attend that conference, and they didn't want him to speak. And this is what goes on, and this is a warning to people out there that attend conferences that are supposedly put on by individuals and organizations that profess to have our best interests in mind and want to put the truth out. A lot of times they have been taken over or are being orchestrated behind the scenes by, like MUFON, which is notorious in this regard, by agents of the CIA and other organizations that are in the intelligence community. And a lot of the conferences have been taken over. The information that you're getting at those conferences is carefully tailored to keep you in a certain kind of state of mind so that you don't think too far outside the box, so you don't really believe there's any bad enemy to humanity, in essence, etc. So there are a number of things that Camelot talks about that other people that get targeted talk about that will not come into the discussions at these conferences. They will be very superficial approaches to this material, I'm sorry to say. So, in essence, they asked Henry Deacon to leave the stage. Then after that, we got a letter from Dan and Marcy, Dan Biersch and Marcy McDowell, who claimed to be members of MJ-12, in essence saying we needed to watch our backs. Okay, so Jake Simpson, he had, if you go on our website and search under the name, any name, search under any name you're interested in, you can find information pertaining to that person, because obviously we have a huge website. And Jake Simpson is a whistleblower who never went on camera and never revealed himself in photos or anything. He, in essence, gave us a great deal of information about the surveillance of humanity that goes incredibly far beyond anything Edward Snowden has said, which brings into question as to who exactly Edward Snowden is working for. And this gets into Julian Assange, etc. And, you know, I like to believe that these individuals are good-hearted individuals who may be being used, for example, by the very organizations that they appear to be rebelling against and not know it, and so on. So it is such a complex game. It's not black and white. It's important to understand that there are, whenever anything comes along that appears to be rebelling against what is in essence this sort of dark status quo, what they will attempt to do, what their job is to obfuscate the truth, to put out what is in essence opposite information to confuse what they think is the low-level human brain, because they think that you do not have the ability to hold two opposite thoughts in your mind at the same time. They actually have a very low opinion of humanity and the human vehicle, in essence. I do not. And I can say that because they also sell you short a lot of the time, they can be deceived. And there are interesting ways of doing that, and staying alive is one of them. But I can tell you that Jake Simpson told us far more about what's really going on in terms of surveillance of humanity than Edward Snowden ever has, or anyone else for that matter out in the sector. So once you find out about the quantum levels of surveillance, you won't decide to still play these silly games of, even if you leave your cell phone at home, you're still surveilled at this point. I'm sorry to say that this earth is very, very well surveilled. Now, I do believe that you can go into some remote places and still get some privacy. Maybe not. If they know who you are, like they know me, it will be more difficult for me to do that. But if you are relatively, benign and they don't think much of you at the moment, it's possible you can get some privacy in that sense. But it will only be in a very low-tech environment, possibly even under the earth. Anyway, so I've covered that. Ashana Dean, these are just their pictures, just so you can see. This is a typo I need to fix, that the middle person is not Pete Peterson, it's Dan Sherman. And this is the whistleblower who wrote the book Above Black that I talked about. It's also interesting that some of our whistleblowers have had their children die in unusual ways. Most people don't realize that Bob Dean's daughter, actually I believe, committed suicide, and that Clifford Stone's son died in a motorcycle accident. Now you can say these were just accidents. You can say they happened for no apparent reason or whatever. Or you might want to look further and see exactly what these individuals have contributed to our understanding of truth on the planet, and you might be able to see that there may be some coercion going on there. Many people want to know about Cameron Faley, who I've talked about many times, and I think I've done 3 interviews with him so far. And I can say he's gone to ground, as they say, right now, meaning he's not accessible. He knows he has an open invitation to do another interview. He has been wrong so far about some things to do with Planet X. Lots of people do get timelines wrong. They predict events that simply don't happen or haven't happened, and this is important to know. I think that even now people are predicting very dire events in the near future, and I don't think that these will necessarily happen the way they envision them. I think that there is a lot of overlay. There's a lot of misinterpretation of information that comes through, whether it be from ETs, human sources, or intelligence sources. You know, a lot of intelligence agents are actually told falsities in order to put out falsities, because if they believe it, they think they've got an inside track. They go out and give you the information. They think it's true, but it's not. They're just, it's like a carrier pigeon in essence. So there's a lot of this stuff going on. It's important to realize that we do have incredible power as creators of reality, that our future is not decided except towards the positive, that in essence what will happen is that humanity, regardless of how many seedings and incarnations you go through, that you will make your way back to source in whatever way and time you feel suits your soul. That again, this is a planet of learning, and that you're not ever going to turn this into a paradise, not in the 3D, 4D world. That 4D is all about groups interacting with other groups. So you've got groups of ETs interacting with various races of humanity, et cetera, and it's all about those interactions that are karmic and otherwise. In other words, a learning process that continues. So this is how I see it. You need to look into the overall big picture yourself. Look into your heart. Look into your dreams that sometimes give you, information about the future. Start to trace your dreams. Start to trace the times when you knew something ahead of time and it turned out to be correct. Trace the times when you thought you knew something ahead of time and it didn't turn out to be correct. Be, in essence, your own scientist, and start to be able to trace your way through reality, also in what George Green likes to call the observer mode, being able to sort of stand back, to go into your higher self, if you want to call it that, and to see the bigger picture. It's also important when dealing with a human being to understand that this body you're interacting with is not the only version of them. That a person who may be on a lofty, so-called lofty pedestal at this time may have been someone who conducted very nefarious deeds in the past. They may have a history that is very humble and very lovely on the one hand, or the opposite, etc. So it can help if you deal with a human being to not judge them, to not become their judge and jury at this time, to not decide that you know what is best for them, etc., just because you're interacting with their physical form here. And that goes for children as well. Each individual should have their own sovereignty, and we should each honor that. And the internet is full of people who like to slice and dice and judge and jury other people all the time, as if they know. And it's simply, you know, it's wrong. And I just want to caution people about that. More whistleblowers. Mark Richards that I've talked about. I can tell you that for what it's worth, when I do encounter Mark Richards, when I deal with him and his wife, as I have over the years, I am encountering a person who conducts himself, even to this day, after 30 years in prison, as a military individual who garners respect, who is highly intelligent, who is not evasive in any way, and who answers from the heart and from, you know, with clarity. So this is what I get. I know that I'm the only journalist for most, I believe, totally, other than his wife, Joanne, who was a journalist for a very short time, from what I understand, who has ever interviewed him. And this is kind of strange, and, you know, see it as you will. Timothy Good, very interesting. He spoke at a UFO Congress in Arizona a couple years ago, not very long ago. I did an interview with him at that time. He went halfway through his presentation in the auditorium there, and they cut off the sound and the picture and everything. He lost everything. He was unable to continue, or desired not to, because he didn't have his tools working. I can tell you there were individuals in the audience there that I observed, I saw this firsthand, who were from agencies, and that as part of his presentations, and Timothy Good is a very good witness, a very good investigator of the truth, who basically got shut down, in part because he peppered his talk with the warning that there are predators here coming from other planets here on planet Earth. So it's very interesting that he was shut down. The rest of the speakers were fine. Simon Parks, I have several interviews with him, and he's spoken at my conferences recently, said some very important information. One of which I will just say here, I will be releasing this as soon as we can get it online. And probably most of the interviews I will charge some money to try to make money back for my flights and all of this kind of thing that I've had to pay for to do these other conferences. And I want to thank the hostess for actually paying my way here, because she was unusual in that respect. But normally I have to pay my own way. And so I have, you know, I go in debt on my credit card and so on and so forth. But I want to say that Simon Parks did reveal some important information he believes is correct. He does have something of an inside track, although I can say that some of his insider information does not correlate with my Cameron Faley information. And Cameron Faley worked for the City of London banking community for a very long time, and his family has been serving that sector for even longer. There are some interesting things to do with Brexit that Simon Parks revealed, importantly. He also revealed that they are planning to do this financial reset, and they will give no notice, and they will go in and remove people's money from their bank accounts at a certain point. And I don't know when this is. He said he will get advance notice as being part of this insider community of something like 24 hours or something. So he's warning people about this. I'm putting this information out there for what it's worth. I believe that it may be that they are going to make your money worth a lot less, but I think he says that they're literally going to go in and take money out of your bank accounts. I'm not sure how that works. or how they're going to rationalize it, what kind of publicity stunt will be going along with that. Supposedly something in the next 6 months, though. Can I have the time? Anyone? Sorry. Okay, so I've been going for about 2 hours. Just a couple more pictures of whistleblowers, just so you can get their faces kind of in your mind. Anthony Sanchez, Richard Allen Miller, and Clifford Stone. By the way, Clifford Stone is an ET communicator. He went on crash retrievals, and he is a lovely soul. As demonstrated in my interviews with him, you'll see he's an incredibly gentle and kind man as well. This is a picture of Cameron Faley. James the Wingmakers is another person I interviewed, but I only did a written interview with him. So some very interesting, elegant, and wonderful information, some of which is very, very accurate, can be had in that interview. Okay, I have a laundry list of black projects. I'm just going to skim through here. If anyone wants access to this laundry list, I did a presentation in the past called Black Projects Follow the Money. If you put in my search term in my website, Black Projects, that presentation should come up and be accessible to download. I'm kind of losing my voice. Important to know these organizations that are kind of covers for what is in essence this thing we call the secret space program. Monsanto, Merck, Westinghouse, Tavistock, and Rand, well-known agencies. Lots to do with the Hadron Collider. One side thing, because I noticed that people don't seem to be aware of this, and it's something I stumbled on, is CERN is not the only one. There are many what we call, or what they call, linear accelerators. Thank you. And those linear accelerators are actually all over the world. They are able to do all kinds of particle beam weapons, creating portals, and so on with these accelerators. They're doing a lot of the same things they're doing with CERN. It is said, and I have testimony to this effect, that one of the things CERN has been working on very heavily is creating a portal that will go direct to the Draconis constellation to make it possible for this certain groups of reptilians to bring in a lot of equipment that they want to make sure that they have, as well as their own craft and so on. So this is basically creating a portal which is interdimensional, if you will. And they have to keep these kind of corridors open. So this is what's also going on. You know, it is very important that knowing is only the beginning. I'll let you read that. You know, some people do ask me, they really think like it doesn't matter whether you know if there's a secret space program. And I have to say that they are making decisions for you every day on this planet. And they're also, especially if you have children, making decisions for those children. They're deciding which of those children will rise up in society and which will stay behind. Which will be used as food sources, and which will become Manchurian candidates, etc., etc. So it does behoove yourself to educate yourself as to what some people consider to be the dark side of what's really going on. And let me say that I'm an extremely optimistic person in spite of the work I do, or maybe because of it. I can tell you that Camelot has become sort of a light beacon, a centralization place where all of this information has come, but also all of the people that are going through stages of awakening, especially in the early days, often come and kind of travel through our material and find themselves awakening as a result of it. And I get letters daily to this effect. So I am optimistic about the future. And I can tell you that the individuals awakening now will not have to go through the long, laborious sort of learning cycles that some of others of us have had to do for them, in essence. That they will learn very quickly, that they could awaken one day, even as a sleeping abductee or whatever, and basically tomorrow be leading people to awakening themselves as well. And this can be children of all ages. It is not difficult for us to learn. Humans have to be surveilled and corralled constantly by the dark side because you are not cattle, because you do change, you do learn at an extraordinary rate, and that you are not containable. And if you were containable, they would have already been done with you and thrown away the key. But that's not what's happening. What they're doing every day is working harder and harder to contain you. And basically, you are rising above it. It's like a balloon. You've seen the ball that you push down into the water, and it keeps popping up to the top, to the surface. This is, in essence, the consciousness of humanity. It will not be kept down. And you are greater than the sum of your parts. That goes individually as well as for the whole of humanity, because we are spirit first. So these are really important things to remember. I'm going to see if there's anything. I guess I'm going to end with this. I have had a vision when I was younger that I don't know if I was among these individuals, but I saw a pyramid landing on what in essence appeared to be Egypt or a place of this nature. And I saw rows of individuals coming out of this craft, and they were coming out by twos, and they were coming to serve the planet. And this was a very strong sort of dream. And I've had a lot of past life recall in Egypt. So I do believe that some of my information comes from there. I can tell you that Akhenaten, in my view, is not the same type of being as Nefertiti. And that, from what I understand, King Tut was not their child. He was adopted. I think this is correct. I believe that Obama was genetically engineered to mirror King Tut. These are important distinctions because the rule of King Tut was something of a facade. He is, I have a presentation that shows you him with all his regalia around him. He was basically a great PR job, and all the riches and the gold and all the nonsense that goes around him. I know there's a lot of New Agers that like to think that King Tut was, somebody of great significance. I do not believe this. I do believe he was a genetically engineered individual to carry out the lineage. But he went back to serve the dark agenda and the dark priests after Akhenaten and Nefertiti had broken away and created what was called Amarna. I went to Amarna. It looks like it's been hit by a nuclear bomb. Unlike most of the sites in Egypt, there are virtually very few or almost no ruins there. The land is just dust. There's a few caves with a few carvings up around the perimeter. And I had some very strong dreams, visions that were extremely real. Maybe more real than anything I've ever had in my life when I was there right after visiting Amarna. I did see Amarna. I do have the ability to sort of time travel when I go to various places and see other layers of the times. And I was able to see the place when it was a jungle and quite an extraordinarily beautiful place. But it is important to know that our history is so completely manufactured and such a lie. And if anything, I have to say, I have made a record album with my partner, Neil Anthony Sanford. It's called Rebel Gene. And the reason it's called Rebel Gene is because it's filled with lyrics. I did the lyrics from telling the sort of information I'm trying to convey to you at this time in lyric form, with music. And Neil Anthony Sanford did the music, and I did the lyrics. And what happens is, Rebel Gene is what it's all about. It is said that in the time of the Anunnaki, Enki and Enlil, there were basically two strains of humans. One strain that was very obedient, and they worked and lived under Enlil, and the other that went under Enki, and that they had a rebel gene, and that he refused to allow them to be, cleaned off the earth, which is what Enlil wanted. And I believe that some of us are, in essence, those survivors, and that we have what is, in essence, is the rebel gene. And I do believe that every human has at their access, whether it's part of their junk DNA or whatever, to awaken this rebel gene. And I think that that is part of our survival kit, to bring humanity through these woods, in dark times, if you will, that you must question everything. You must, in essence, rebel against everything. And you must find your own center and find out what matters to you, what it means to you, in the deepest, most quietest place you can find. And when I talk about Kundalini and meditation, etc., I talk about doing this. I have done this. I have retreated from society and spent, I spent probably a year doing that, but I spent some very concentrated time, 2 to 3 months, in which I awakened my Kundalini and went through all of this when I was in my early 20s. But I highly recommend it, and I can tell you that it is what will matter in the future of humanity, and it is what will carry us, and this vehicle, which is absolutely a superb vehicle, which is capable of so much. And I do recommend a website called BioMind Superpowers. It was put together by Ingo Swann, said to be one of the more psychic individuals of humanity, even, who's died now. So that if you're curious about the histories of what is called remote viewing, and there's lots of lies around remote viewing. There's also something called remote influencing. It's highly possible that Max Spears, for example, was killed through remote influencing. And it is possible, and they know this, that you can kill somebody psychically. But this is the dark side of the power that the dark side inhabits and don't want you to know about. There's a light side and a dark side. And it also means that you can be a healer. The more you activate your awareness and your Kundalini, the more you have the ability to heal not only yourself, but others. And in essence, we are all shamans, shamanists. We are all healing each other and ourselves. That's the journey. It's a journey of healing. And Phil Schneider and the Dulce story is notorious. I just have some, images here to show you about the kinds of things going on there. Mark Richards, Captain Mark Richards that I've been talking about, he and his father took a battalion into Dulce to shut it down. They rescued the humans at that time. And according to Mark, about a couple weeks later, the ETs went in and re-abducted the humans and took them back. And so this is the kind of battle that we're engaged in. It is a dark battle. There are all kinds of aspects to it. The ancient sites are key. Our ancient history is absolutely key. ISIS has been tasked, according to Cameron Faley, who is a Kurd, and he's spent a lot of time in Iraq and grew up, I guess, in that area as well as England. He says that ISIS has been tasked by the New World Order to go and destroy certain key sites, including, they've already done Palmyra, as you may know, some key areas of that. But they're supposed to go and destroy others. That's actually one of their main jobs, and they're being paid to do it. And you have to ask yourself, why do they want to destroy ancient sites? And it's because of the history of humanity that reveals the things that Ashiana Dean's books, the Voyager books, are telling, that the Bible is full of lies. It's so full of lies. Well, in my view, it's pretty worthless, but I do understand some people find value in it. Portals and stargates are keys to understanding what's really going on this planet and who you really are and your capabilities. We are all time travelers. I've recently visited a site near the border of Turkey and Syria, which is now surrounded by war. And we took a lot of photographs and did a documentary there. I could show it at the end or later, but it's also on my website if you want to watch it there. One of the things that was put into the museum are some carvings, and this carving shows a praying mantis, for example, holding a human being. There may be some indication that it's giving birth to that human. You may know that Simon Parkes considers himself to be part praying mantis, that he's like 33%, I think he says, praying mantis in his DNA. This human head has a snake going along the back. That's symbolizing Kundalini energy. The snake is always symbolizing the rising of the snake of the Kundalini, snake of light coming from the base of the spine up along the spine through the crown chakra and above, symbolizing enlightenment. So there are all kinds of things that you can find in museums and all over the world. We have photographed museums, cat beings. I think these photographs were taken from what was taken from off the coast of Alexandria, was recently in an exhibition in London. And they had very little in that exhibition, but they did have some beings. I think possibly some of these came from there. There is so much symbolism surrounding stargates and going through stargates and portals. It's amazing. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you for listening. I hope this has been worthwhile, and I'm happy to take questions if we have time for them. And I believe they want to do possibly some kind of a panel discussion with the speakers that are on hand, and then we will continue tomorrow.